Hi, Carl here for ProVTV and welcome to part 2 of our series of tests on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Now before we get started, I just wanted to say welcome to all the new subscribers because the first part of this did fantastically well. It was really great to see so many of you commenting and being active and subscribing to the channel. It's really great to hear what you guys are all thinking of this camera so far, to see how excited you all are and to see just how many things you want us to test. So in this video, we're going to finally address some of the most asked things about in this camera, primarily the audio. A lot of people are asking about the audio, a lot of people are asking about internal microphones, the XLR, the 3.5mm jack, can you hear the fan noise, all of this sorts of stuff. So I'm going to try and cover all of those in this video. We're also going to do some stuff on the stills and the time-lapse and a few little bits and bobs of interesting questions that I've spotted from down in the comments and I've had sent in. So let's get started. So first up, we've got the good old rolling shutter test. This is the age-old, very unscientific, just simply wave the camera from side to side crazily to see how much the image skews. We've used the model here in the showroom this time and we've gone for a nice telephoto macro shot on the fences. We've done this for a number of reasons. Firstly, the longer you zoom in, the more noticeable any rolling shutter artifacts are. So with a telephoto lens, you normally see any jello more than you would on a wider one. And also the fence gives us a series of nice straight lines so that we can see whether those straight lines are bending at all either way as we pan the camera. So as we can see here, as we play it back real time, there is a slight rolling shutter effect. It's nothing crazy bad. Certainly, I mean, obviously this is so unrealistic. You're never going to be shooting like this in the real world situation. And as we slow it down here, you can see just how much it's impacting. On these reasonable slow speeds, you only really notice it at the start of the speed. Once you get going, those lines are looking pretty straight to me. You just notice a little bit of a warp straight away as the camera very quickly starts to move. So there is some, but it's nothing that I'm going to be too worried about. So that's rolling shutter. Let's move on to the main bulk of this video, which is going to be the audio comparisons. So this is our simple audio comparison. All this footage has been recorded straight into the Blackmagic camera, and we've got a variety of different microphone methods to get the sound from this simple piece to camera. I'm wearing a lav mic. This is the Sennheiser AVX unit, which we use for this channel, and it's their ME2 microphone, again, the one that we normally use. And at the moment it's going into the mini XLR port, but we can also plug it into the 3.5mm. We've got other microphones, and we've got a Zoom H6 as well, which we're going to record with this AVX into. Sort of use that as a bit of a reference to see how good the preamps in camera are versus ones on external recorders like that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read a passage from Blackmagic's website, and then we're just going to cycle through each of the recording methods and see how the quality changes. So first up, this is the AVX unit with the ME2 microphone going into the mini XLR port with their adapter cable from Blackmagic. So this is the AVX plugged into the 3.5mm jack on the camera rather than the XLR, and interestingly we've had to boost up the gain quite a bit to get the same sound levels. So it'll be interesting to see if you can tell any difference between the last take and this. And now we've got the Rode VideoMic Pro attached to the top of the camera itself, again going into that 3.5mm jack. I'm going to leave a bit of a pause now just so that we can see if we can hear the fans from the actual camera. We've now swapped over to the internal microphones. I mean, I'm a good 1.5 meters away from the camera here, but it is pretty quiet in here. And we have turned the levels on the camera right up to 100%, but Dan is still saying that my levels are a little bit low. So this might not be quite a fair test, but it's interesting that we can't get the levels quite high enough for this situation. And finally, we're going to record onto the Zoom H6 as a bit of a reference, if you like, to judge the preamp quality between the camera and the Zoom. So this is the AVX unit again into the Zoom H6. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K gives you the professional features you need, all in a portable and affordable design that can be used anywhere. It's perfect for shooting independent films and documentaries, fashion shows, travel blogs, web videos, weddings, corporate video, sports, and more. The incredible image quality, advanced Blackmagic design, color science, and raw recording let you shoot images that rival professional digital film cameras costing tens of thousands more. That means you get the image quality you need to seamlessly mix footage from the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K with other types of cameras used on high-end Hollywood feature films and episodic television shows. So I don't think there was too many nasty hidden surprises there. I had a lot of customers asking, is there a bit of a background hiss or something like that, and not really trusting the inputs on the Blackmagic. And actually, I thought that was perfectly fine. I couldn't hear much of an audio quality difference at all between the Zoom and the Blackmagic ones when used with the AVX. Obviously, when you use the Rode VideoMic Pro or the internal microphones, the sound goes down a lot. That's not really down to the camera, that's down to the style of microphone being used, of course. I mean, a lav mic like this is always going to sound way better, and that's why we always encourage our customers to invest properly in sound equipment. It's also very interesting that the internal microphones were so much quieter. Now, obviously, you'd expect them to be quieter. The microphone is much, much further away than it is when I'm using a lav mic, for example. With a lav mic, it's right here next to my mouth. With an internal microphone on a camera, it's right over there by the camera. It's obviously going to be recording the sound quieter. But we didn't just have to bump up the levels a little bit. We had to bump them all the way up. And then even then, when I was only a meter and a half speaking relatively loudly in a quiet room, it still wasn't loud enough, and we had to boost it further in post. So they sound okay quality, but they are going to be a little bit on the quiet side, those internal microphones. A lot of you have been asking about the stills performance, which is perhaps unusual for a Blackmagic camera because just like all their other cameras, this is definitely marketed and aimed at the video audience. It's a cinema camera. It's marketed as a cinema camera. It's got RAW, it's got DNG, it's got ProRes. This is definitely a video camera through and through. But they made a very interesting decision to add a stills button next to the video record button on the top. And that's got a lot of us thinking, is this perhaps intended to be slightly more of a hybrid camera, like we've seen on the Panasonic GH5 or the Sony A7 or Canon's DSLRs, cameras like that which are just as good a stills camera as they are a video camera. In fact, in many cases, a better stills camera than a video camera. And to be honest, no, I don't think that is the case. I think what this is mainly going to be used for is reference stills. So you can take one frame grab so that you can use it as reference for what that video shot is going to look like for framing, for sharing with other people, for something like that, or maybe even for color grades. There's so many useful cases for doing that. I think that's what this is for, really, rather than actually taking it as a stills photograph. And I say that for several reasons. Firstly is how it actually physically works. It's this little button here next to the record button, but it's not the same as it is on a stills camera. On a stills camera, it's a very nice tactile button which you can half press to focus, full press to take the photo, and you get a lot of feedback from that button. This is a little bit fiddlier, and you sort of have to push it right down to make sure that it presses. It's not quite as simple and as easy. Although it's just a button, it does actually make a big, big difference. And also, the only way that you're going to be able to tell that you've taken a still is this tiny little icon that's going to appear in the top right of the screen. And also, where the media is, it's going to physically say still, rather than show how many minutes of video you've got remaining. Now, on a stills camera, you'd be used to having an audible sound of some kind, or maybe a bit of a blackout in the viewfinder, something like that, to give you a bit of feedback, to say to you as the operator, yes, I've taken that photo now. You're not going to get any of that on here. All that you'll get is those tiny little icons to go off. And then in terms of the actual file, this isn't a higher resolution still or anything like that. It is simply a 4K video grab in DNG. So there's no JPEGs or anything like that. It's purely DNG, and it's going to be exactly the same image quality, its sharpness, everything the same as that, as if it was a raw video in cinema DNG format. We've got some side-by-side comparisons here where you can see there's no difference in terms of color, in terms of sharpness, in terms of anything. We've literally plucked one frame from a cinema DNG sequence and put it next to that DNG file that's created by that stills button, and they are identical in every single way. A couple of interesting things. The 1080p performance is interesting. When it's in windowed and you're using a windowed crop of the sensor, that stills button is going to keep in that crop and it is going to give you a 1080p DNG file. Whereas when you're using the full width of the sensor but downsampling to 1080p in camera, it's going to give you a 4K RAW. And this is because it's using the same engine as the Cinema DNG side of the camera. It can only downsample to 1080p using the full sensor when it's in a compressed format like ProRes. It can't do that in Cinema DNG for video, and that's why it can't do that for the DNG stills images as well. Another interesting addition is time-lapse. So I don't think Blackmagic, again, are intending this to fully replace a time-lapse setup for time-lapse professionals. For that, you're definitely still going to want a stills camera and an intervalometer, something that gives you the control over your exposure length and your intervals, everything that in ramping, you know, time-lapse professionals need a lot of control. This, though, is perhaps one of the simplest and easiest to use time-lapse solutions I've actually played with. It's just very easily enabled in the menus. It's on the third page of the record settings. There's one switch to turn on time-lapse and then one simple slider to say how often you want to capture a frame. Now, for those of you new to time-lapse, what this simply is going to do is the further along you put that, the more sped up your time-lapse is going to be in the final thing, and the longer it's going to take you to film the same amount. Basically, rather than taking 25 frames a second, for example, it's going to spread those frames out over a longer amount of time and then squash them together to speed up your action. And that's just going to do that really simply in camera for you. So the further apart you have each frame being captured, so whether it's 5 seconds or every 5 frames or something like that, the more sped up your final video is going to be, and the longer you're going to have to stand there and actually film for the same length of final video. So Dan went down to our local park just to get a quick example of this. And as you can see, it's very similar to the normal video quality. It looks just as sharp, or the same sort of colors as the video. It's just sped up. And a really nice touch is that you can play it back in camera. That's because the camera is building this into a video time-lapse for you. One of the most difficult bits about working with time-lapse is actually constructing it once you're done. That post-production workflow. When you end up with, say, 500 still images, you've then got to edit them all, you've then got to rebuild that into one video file, and that's intensive. That takes time to do. It's worth it for the control when you're a professional time-lapse. For just those of us that just want to insert one super fast little time-lapse into, say, a corporate video, something like that, this is going to be a much easier way to do it because the camera's going to do all of the work for you. One of the most asked about topics in the comment section was definitely how well it works with different gimbals. So we took the 3 gimbals that we had access to here in the showroom and tried it on each of them. First up, we've got the Ronin S. Now this balanced absolutely fine. The main difficulty, as it was, to be honest, with every single gimbal, was the physical width of the camera. And because the majority of the weight is offset here on the left where the lens is, the main bit on the right is just the battery compartment, and so it's a lot lighter than the left of the camera. So it's a bit of an unbalanced camera that's physically wider on the right-hand side. So it's a little bit difficult to get balanced. So we found we needed a little bit of an extra part on each one of the gimbals to make it work. The nice thing about the Ronin S, though, was that this was included with the actual gimbal. In the box, when you buy the gimbal, you get a little riser plate, which not only lets you the camera sit higher up, but it also allows you to offset it to the side a little bit. And this is what we found helped us balance it. Because it can offset over to the side, it meant it gave you more space for the handle and meant that you could just slide the gimbal and balance it as normal and it would physically fit on. Without that, we just simply couldn't physically fit it onto the gimbal. Then with the Zion Crane 2, we found we needed basically the same thing, but the Zion Crane 2 doesn't come with a riser plate like that. So we used the Arca Swiss tripod plate from Small Rig. This is a really useful piece of kit anyway. There's so many uses for an Arca style Swiss plate. We use it all the time here in the showroom, mainly to quickly go from one tripod to another, onto the auto cue system, onto a tripod, onto a slider. It's absolutely brilliant. But what we used it for here specifically was to basically do the same job as that riser. It lets the camera sit that little bit higher up, and it gives you, if you mount it on sideways, gives you control for sliding the camera from the left and to the right. So we slide it a little bit to the left, gives us more space for the hand grip, and lets us balance the camera properly. So with the Zion Crane 2, you needed something like the tripod plate from Small Rig, an Arca Swiss style one, to let you slide the camera backwards and forwards. And then with the original Ronin, we found that we had the most problems. Now this was mainly because of physically trying to fit it between the two sides of the gimbal here. As you can see, there isn't that much clearance. The other big issue that we were finding is because the camera is a little bit unbalanced. The right-hand side of it is a little bit lighter than the left-hand side of it because the lens is closer to the left-hand side. So we used this Arca Swiss style plate from Small Rig in order to counterbalance a little bit. That's why it's so offset to the right here. Interestingly though, if you put a larger lens on, you didn't need that. And the reason being is because the camera was then more front heavy, you could just slide the entire camera unit back, clearing the handle away from the physical construction of the actual gimbal, meaning that it could sit behind the edge of the gimbal's cage there. So you didn't need anything extra if you were using a bigger lens. But with this little 12 to 35 Lumix lens that we've been using throughout the other gimbals for this shoot, we did find that we had to use the Arca Swiss plate from Small Rig, and that was mainly used as a counterbalance. Of course, you can use other things to counterbalance this, like maybe the official ones from DJI, or I'm sure there's lots of other methods as well, but this was the solution that we had ready to hand, and so this was the most convenient for us, and this is what we found worked for us. Overall though, it did balance, albeit with a little bit of help, but it did balance on every single gimbal we tried it with, and it's actually quite a nice gimbal, nice camera to use with those gimbals. Because of that large screen on the back, and because the actual camera itself is so lightweight, it really is an enjoyable experience using it, particularly with those little one-handed gimbals. I'm seeing a lot of people ask in the comment section about different RAW formats and what might potentially be coming to this in the future. Now, I've got no firm answers here. All I know for certain is what's in it now, which is Cinema D&G. This is the same as we've seen on pretty much every Blackmagic camera to date. But at IBC this year, they did announce their own RAW format, so Blackmagic RAW. At the moment, this is only available on the Ursa Mini Pro, their larger, more professional film camera. They have said though that they really want to bring it to this. They've not said that it's definitely coming. They've said that it's probably coming and that they really want to put it on this. Now that's a bit interesting. They're sort of not committing to bringing it to this. I wonder if that's maybe because of some technical limitations. I imagine this has a lot less processing power and particularly cooling capability compared to their larger camera for obvious reasons. This is a lot smaller. It's a lot harder to get everything going on in here. But they have said very publicly that they really, really want to put it in here. And for good reason. It would be fantastic in here. It's a much better RAW format. From the surface, I haven't properly used it yet in depth, but on the surface it looks much more convenient and just as good a quality as Cinema D&G. So it's a very welcome addition, and I think it would be a real asset to this camera if it was added. Some people are also asking about ProRes RAW and will that come to it? This is Apple's new RAW format that we've seen on things like Atmos's new devices. Now, because Blackmagic have introduced their own RAW format, you've got to sit back and think about it from a business point of view. Are they going to introduce somebody else's RAW format onto it as well as this? Now, I'd imagine probably not. It would be fantastic if it did get added. I was really hopeful with ProRes RAW that it was going to become this industry standard, that it would be a RAW format that was picked up by everyone. But because of Apple's mentality and keeping it closed into just Final Cut Pro X at the moment, and Blackmagic being so open to other things, they've openly said that they're already working with other software manufacturers to try and get it into everything from a software point of view. And they've also said that they'd be willing to open it up to other camera manufacturers for them to put it in their cameras. None of this is something which Apple have talked about with ProRes RAW yet. So even though this is Blackmagic RAW, this potentially could have that same idea, that same potential of becoming an industry standard RAW format. I don't know if it will, just purely because it's called Blackmagic RAW. I can't see other people liking that too much, but potentially it does have the potential to become that RAW format, and it does tick a lot of the same boxes than ProRes RAW does. I'm sure they've each got their, if you get down into the nitty-gritty of each format, I'm sure they've got their pros and cons for each one, and some people will argue one is better than the other, and I'm sure you get people arguing on both sides of that. But I think if they added Blackmagic RAW to this, I think it's unlikely that they'll add ProRes RAW to this, and I think for the average end user, I think it doesn't really matter too much. Either one is going to fulfill the same box and be a compressed RAW format that's going to take the deburring away from the camera and into post-production to give you that raw flexibility in post, but in an easier workflow than we're used to with Cinema DNG. So either would be a fantastic addition to this camera and very welcome indeed. Now this is going to be a very quick one. Some people have been asking, does it have UHS2 technology for the SD cards? That's the second row of pins that enables more modern, faster UHS2 compatible SD cards to read and write data at much faster speeds. And yes, this camera does have it. That means that with more and more modern SD cards, as the future goes on as well, we don't know what's going to come out in the future. There could be an even faster standard that's coming. This camera should be future-proofed a little and should help you get the most out of that SD card slot. Lots of people have also been talking about proxy recording. This would be fantastic. Imagine shooting onto the CFast in RAW, Cinema DNG, or Blackmagic's RAW once it comes to it, and then onto the SD card, recording ProRes proxy files, ready to just take away straight away for an edit. That would be amazing. It doesn't do it. I mean, that is very intensive. That's lots of processing needs to go on in there. And you've got to remember the price of this camera, the size of this camera is just not physically able to do it. There aren't any options for it in the menu that I can see. No, I don't think this camera is going to have any form of proxy recording, even in future updates. Right, so that was our part 2 of our technical tests on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. So stay tuned for part 3 and potentially even part 4 as well, because I've got so many things I want to do with this camera. The main thing now from here onwards is comparisons. I really want to lock myself away in a room with this for a while and do side-by-side comparisons to all sorts of different other cameras on the market. I want to test things like dynamic range, color performance, shadow retention, highlight retention, all of this sorts of stuff. I'm going to do side-by-side split-screen comparisons with as many different cameras as I can get my hands on. So make sure you keep an eye on the channel for those. Hopefully they'll be up within a week or so. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got anything else you want me to test on this, leave it in the comment section down below, and make sure to check out the rest of the channel for all our other coverage on other cameras as well. We put 2 videos up on here a week, and so we do an awful lot of videos like this on all sorts of different video cameras in the professional video world. Thank you so much for watching. The links to buy one of these cameras, if you want to, is down in the description below, and any of the accessories we talk about in any of these videos, I will always put the links down in the description to our website down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.